two of you actually clarified it with me. So how many of you are really sure about the difference between SDF and SRTF? If there is a confusion, raise your hand, I'll explain it again. Online people also, if you have a confusion in SDF and SRTF, please raise your hand. Okay, can someone tell me the difference between the two? So this statement that shortest remaining time first is a preemptive version of shortest job first is creating some confusion. All of you are late, by the way. Okay, can someone tell me the difference between shortest job first and shortest remaining time first? Someone from the back, from the third row onwards. Would have studied. Yes, go on. Exactly. Right. So I'll explain it with an example for all of you who are sort of confused here in the difference between the two. So the idea is in the shortest job first, you just choose a process which has the shortest burst time and you start executing it. When this process is executing, if another process comes which is having a even shorter burst time than the current one, you don't care. So you are not going to preempt. So you are not going to look at the processes who are currently coming. Your only concern is the process which is currently occupying the CPU. You are only going to preempt it in two cases. First, it either finishes its execution, it's terminated, or second, it needs an input output and it goes to a blocked state. If one of those things happen, you will do a rescheduling and you will select the shortest process next. In shortest remaining time first, something else happens. So let's see it with the help of an example. So let's say I have two processes, P0 and P1. Let's look at their arrival times and burst time. Let's say for P0, its burst time is 15 milliseconds and its arrival time is 0. For P1, the burst time is 2 and let's say its arrival time is 1. Right? So with this case, let's see shortest job first and shortest remaining time first, they will give you different answers. So what will happen with shortest job first? You started executing P0 at time 0, right? And P0 is going to go and complete its entire burst till 15 milliseconds. At time 1, P1 came which had a shorter burst, but shortest job first will not care. It's not going to preempt. It's going to run the process P0 till it is finished or till it either requires an input output, and after that you will go on and execute P1. Shortest remaining time first we say is a preemptive version of shortest job first. So what a preemptive version means? Preemptive version means that whenever a new process comes in the ready queue, based on its arrival time, you should recompute the whole thing. You should see that if there is some other process which should actually run now, and I should forcefully take away the CPU from the process which is currently running. So what will happen in shortest remaining time first? Again at 0, you will start executing P0. P0 just executed till here and P1 came. Now if you look at it, P0 requires 14 more milliseconds to complete. P1 requires only 2. So shortest remaining time first, it will actually preempt. P1 will preempt P0. P1 will execute till 3 and after that P0 will continue. So this is the difference between both. Right? Okay. So now we will continue from where we left off yesterday. So we were discussing about the synchronization primitives and we saw around 3 solutions yesterday. Both of these 3 solutions, they had problems. So today we'll talk about a 4th solution which is called the Peterson's algorithm, and it ensures that all these synchronization constraints, they are met. So what I'm going to do now is, again, I have 2 processes or I have 2 threads which are sharing memory. So let's say this is P0, this is P1. I'm going to represent processes something like this. I'll have everything written inside a while one loop. Right? So what this while one loop indicates, inside this while one loop, I'm having my critical section code, and this critical section, it is being repeated again and again. This while one is written here just so that know that critical section, it is required by this process again and again. It's not the case that it will execute this critical section only once. What is critical section? What is critical section? Can someone tell me? Okay, tell me, is critical section, what is it? Okay, so tell me, is critical section going to be the same for P0 and P1? What exactly is critical section? Is it an operating system code, or is it some other instructions, or is it the code in a program? This thing has to be clear. So please know that we are not studying it just from a theoretical point of view. So whenever you will be writing codes for multi-processing systems where you will be having multiple threads running together, you will require to implement all these things in practice, whether you go in industry or for higher studies. Okay, so let's look at it like this. Let me clarify it in case it was not clarified yesterday. Anyone online, you can answer in the chat window. Okay, so let us say you are writing a piece of code, a big piece of code, and you are implementing some machine learning algorithm, right? So you are going to implement this algorithm on a particular data set, right? So you have a data set here. You might have imported it as a pandas data frame or something. So basically it's a variable. It is a data set here, quite a big data set. And then you want to apply some algorithms on this data set. Assume that as the first step. No one talk, please. If you have to talk, go out and talk. If you want attendance, tell me, I'll give you, but I don't need any unnecessary noise in the class. Am I audible till the end? Let me know if I should raise my voice. Okay, so the idea is now you are writing this piece of code, you are going to implement certain algorithms on this data set. Let's say these algorithms pertain to some part of data cleaning, right? So you are applying various data cleaning algorithms on this data set and you have your functions for that. Maybe there is a function which removes unnecessary semicolons from your data set. Another function might be checking for the places where certain cells are empty. You might be filling them up based on some average value, or you might be filling them with some zeros or NAs. That can be some other part. There can be third part which could be correcting some spellings in your data set, so on and so forth. So all of these are different algorithms. Let's say there are 4 algorithms you want to run on this data set. So you can implement each of these algorithms as a different function. So I have 4 functions which are running on this data set. Now what you would want, one idea is you sequentially execute all these 4 functions, right? But let's say it's a very big data set, you are going to execute your program on HPC or let's say DGX or even your computer. So you would want to run all these different functions on different cores, right? So that your entire code, it gets executed faster. So you would prefer making 4 threads out of these 4 functions. Each of these threads is now running independently. Each of these threads is executing one function, is executing one algorithm. And then we discussed what is the problem there. All of these threads which are running on these different processors, they are accessing the same data set. So if one process or one thread is making some manipulation into this data set, what if another thread also writes to the same place? The exact same cell of your data set? That becomes a problem, and that is a problem which we are trying to solve with synchronization. It's a very practical problem. How do we do that is the question. So what we do, I have these, so let's say for timing we just have 2 threads and we want that both of these 2 threads, they should not access the data set at the same time. So this data set here is a shared variable, right? And the shared variable, it should be accessed only by one of these functions at a time, one of these threads at a time. So T1 is running here on, let's say, one processor, T2 is running here on another processor, and here you have a small set of instructions, small lines in your codes which are making some changes to this data frame. Let's say something like df equals to I equals to something, and let's say here is another line in T2 which is making some change in this data frame. Both of these are running on different processors. Then if somehow both of these processors, they execute this line and second processor execute this line at the same time, there is going to be a problem. And we discussed, even if there are no multi-cores, even if you are executing this code on a single processor system where both of these threads, they would be context switching. So T1 will be running for some time, T2 will be running for some time, then T1, then T2, so on and so forth. In that case also there can be a problem. We discussed that with the help of the count variable. There can be a race condition, right? So what is now critical section? I want to ensure that whenever this thread is executing any of these instructions, there should be I won't say there should be no context switch. A context switch should happen, but during that time when T1 is actually executing any of these instructions, T2 should be stopped here. T2 should not proceed. In case T2 is executing any of these instructions, T1 should stop, T1 should not proceed. So this part of code where you are accessing the shared variable inside a program, that part of code is called a critical section. The critical section for T1 is going to be different from critical section of T2. The thing is, both of these critical sections, they are accessing a shared memory. Okay. So now I'm going to write entire thing like this. So let's say this is my thread 1 or a process 1. Let me rather say thread 0. I'm going to write it like this. Just tell me if there is some doubt here. Here I have this part which is the critical section. Other than this critical section also, there's going to be a whole lot of code, right? So the critical section is the one where I'm accessing the shared variable. So other than this critical section, I have a whole lot of code written here before it and a whole lot of code written after the critical section, right? So this remaining part of code where you are not accessing any shared variable per se, this part is called the remainder section, just a name for it. So this is remainder section and this is also remainder section. Same thing is happening with your other program T1 here. The only reason why I am putting it in a while loop is the critical section gets executed again and again. Remainder section is also getting executed again and again. Your code might not be an exact replica of this situation. You might not have any while condition in your code where a critical section is sitting inside. It might be the case you execute remainder section, critical section, remainder section, critical section. It's just a generalization of the problem that you are accessing this critical section again and again. Okay, here we have T1. T1 also have the same things. So some remainder section here, some remainder section here, and here again this is the critical section. Please note that the code here will be different from the code which is written here. It can be the same, it can be different. The only idea is both of these are accessing the same shared variable, which can be a data frame, which can be an array, which can be a normal integer or some other data type. It's just they are accessing the same shared memory. Okay. What I have to do now, our objective was, so let's say T-Note is running and it wants to enter its critical section. So before entering its critical section, it should do some kind of checks. And that check should basically pertain to whether some other process is in their critical section or some other thread is there. If some other thread is there, it has to wait. If some other thread is not there, it has to somehow tell that, well, yes, I'm going to execute in my critical section and all of you wait till time I get out. So that particular part of your code, that is called the entry section. So some checks and some validations which a thread or a process is going to do before the critical section. After you come out of the critical section, again in some way you'll have to inform these processes that I am done. So I'm sort of repetitive here as the yesterday's lecture. This part is going to be called the exit section. Right? So before this was your code. So your code was actually remainder section, critical section and remainder section. You are now supposed to write a code in the entry section and exit section. It is your responsibility how you fill up this space. And we have seen various ways yesterday which failed. Here also I'm going to have this entry section here and exit section here, right? So just to make them easy, let me call this remainder section R, remainder section, critical section. Let's represent entry section by E meanwhile and exit section by X. just some notation which will help us understand the solution. Now I am going to give you a perfect solution and you are going to explain me how is it a perfect solution. It will require some thinking here, some involved thinking. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have 3 more shared variables. Yesterday we were trying to work with just 1 more shared variable. So what I'll do is I have 3 more shared variable here. One is for want 0. Want 0 will tell whether process 0 it wants to execute in its critical section or not. Then we have a want 1. Want 1 will tell me whether process T1 wants to go in its critical section or not. I'll have a third variable which I'll call turn. Now I'm going to fill up this code. So initially I'll say want 0 is false, want 1 is false. Turn, you give it any value, 0 or 1, I don't care. It can be anything. Okay. What I'm going to write in my entry section now is, I'll say I want to go. So here T naught or P naught, it wants to go in the critical section. So it says want 0 equals to true. Want, you can basically make them Boolean variables. Turn can be also a Boolean variable in case there are just 2 processes which you want to represent as 0 or 1. Okay. It will do want 0 equals to true. It will then do turn equals to 1. What is it trying to do? So is it more, it's more like these threads, they are trying to be humble. So thread 0, it is saying that I want to go, but it's your turn. I want to go, but it's your turn. In case you want to go ahead and execute in your critical section. And what thread 0 will do after this point. So see, there is a problem here. So when I say turn equals to 1, I should only wait if T1 actually wants to go. Right, I have said that it's your turn, but maybe other process it doesn't want to execute in its critical section. So I'll check for 2 conditions here. When want 1 is true, basically process 1 it wants to go into its critical section, as well as if turn equals to 1, it is the turn of process 1 or thread 1. I am going to wait here. So always remember there is a semicolon here which represents that this thread is going to loop here. And after I am done with my critical section, in exit section, I'll declare want 0 equals to false. I no more want to be in my critical section. Process 1 or thread 1 will do exactly the symmetrically opposite thing. So it will say, okay, well, I want to execute in my critical section, but it is the turn of process 0 and I am going to wait till process 0, it wants critical section and also it is his turn. So turn is 0. And again a semicolon here. And after coming back, I'm going to set want 1 equals to false. And this looks like a complicated piece of code. So let's dissect it one by one and see what is happening here. So one thing, let's go step by step. So case number 1. Let's say both the processes, both the threads T0 and T1 are executing in their remainder sections. You know what a remainder section is, right? Nothing inside this E, X and CS, everything outside this particular block here, right? That is your remainder section, basically the yellow portion here. So if T0 and T1 both are executing in their remainder section, is there any issue? Yes or no? How many of you think there is no issue? 1. Okay. Anyone else who thinks there is no issue here? How many of you think there is an issue? There is no issue, right? In the remainder section, they are more like independent processes. They are not sharing any variable there. So T0 is doing certain computations, T1 is doing certain computations. They are not sharing anything there. These are independent computations. So they can go and execute as they like. Okay, case number 2. So let us say one process is inside this block here. Basically, let's say T0 is not in the remainder section. It can be anywhere inside this place. This E critical section or X, entry critical section or X, but let's say T1 is in the remainder section. So the point is one thread is in the remainder section, Another thread is in this red portion here, either in entry, exit, or in the critical section. Is there a problem there? No again, right? What will happen? So see, if T1 is executing in its remainder section, then please note that if T1 is executing in its remainder section, want1 will always be false. Right, because want1 was false in the very beginning, and whenever T1 is done executing its critical section, it again sets want1 equals to false. I'm saying that T1 is in its remainder section. Basically, it's nowhere here. So if T1 is nowhere in this region, want1 is always going to be false. Please realize that. Because at the starting it is false, and whenever T1 is done with this portion, it sets want1 equals to false. Whenever I complete this portion, I set want1 equals to false. So if T1 is in its remainder section, want1 is going to be false. If want1 is false, then you come here and see T0 can always execute. T0 will come out of this loop. T0 is only waiting if want1 is true and if turn equals to 1. So want1 is now false. So if T1 is in its remainder section, T0 can always execute. Similarly, if T0 is in its remainder section, T1 can always execute. Okay. Look at this code. Try to think on your own. Can you tell me where do you think a problem will happen? Now give me some pointers and we will discuss based on those pointers. In the first two cases, there is no problem. Now, let's say both of these processes, let me take the first problem here. What if both the processes, they want to execute in their critical sections? What will happen? So both of them want to access the shared variable. What will happen? So well, T0, it's going to set want 0 equals to true. And you can always argue that all these statements here, want 0 equals to true, want 1 equals to true, it is very much possible that when T0 is executing want 0 equals to true, it is not yet done finishing this statement. This statement is also a combination of multiple assembly language instructions. So when T0 is actually executing this want 0 equals to true, there can be a context switch and you can switch to T1. Right. Similarly, whenever T1 is executing some instruction, there can be a context switch and you can come back to T0. So let us say T0, it is trying to set want 0 equals to true. It's trying to declare that I want to execute in my critical section. It has not yet declared, but a context switch happens. So for T1, want 0 is still false. So you say T1 can go and execute in its critical section. For T1, T0 is not done finishing this statement here, right? So for T1 here, want 0 is actually false. So it sees here inside the while condition that T0 doesn't want the critical section, I can go and execute. There is again no problem. The problem which we need to think about is what when both the processes have sort of declared that both of us want to execute in the critical section. So mainly this statement is also executed, want1 equals to true, and this statement is also executed, want1 equals to true. What will happen next? Both of us declared that we want to enter our critical sections. Now see what is happening. Both of them are trying to give the turn to the other person. So T0 is trying to say, T1 it's your turn. T1 is saying to T0 it is your turn. Right, and when they are setting these values of turns to each other, there can be some context which is happening during that time. So T0 is trying to say, okay, it's your turn. So you can imagine it like both of these people, they are trying to enter into a bus and they have to decide who goes in the bus first. They are sure that both of us want to enter. Only one can enter at a time. T0 is saying to T1, okay, it's your turn, you go. T1 is saying to T0, okay, it's your turn, you go. But it takes them some time to say this to the other person. Same context which has happened, and it takes some time for them to finish setting this value of turn. So now the idea here is both of these processes are trying to be humble. So what I'm saying, the process who is more humble, the process actually who executes this statement first. So one of them is going to execute it first. Let's say T naught executes it first. So T naught is going to set turn equals to 1, right? And T1 is going to later set turn equals to 0. So what I'm saying here is the process who is able to finish this instruction first is going to enter into its critical section. It's like the process, the person who is more humble, who finishes his statement first, that well, you go first, actually will get to go first. Why? Okay, so T naught completes this. T naught says, okay, turn equals to 1. So note that now T naught cannot execute in its critical section. Why? Want 1 is true, right? And turn is also 1. So it will keep looping in this while loop. Rather, to make this simple, what you can do is, once both of these processes have expressed that I want to execute in critical section, other process is also said I want to execute in this critical section. If you see, both of these conditions will be satisfied. Want 1 is true and want 0 is also true. So to make this simpler, I can actually remove this for now, in case I know that both of them want to enter into the critical section. Okay, what is happening now? T naught finishes and says turn equals to 1, but it cannot enter into the critical section because it is looping in this condition. So it is waiting, it is 1's turn, I cannot go inside. So it is continuously looping here. Meanwhile, T1 is still slowly processing this statement and it's trying to set turn equals to 0. So as soon as T1 sets turn equals to 0, now you see T naught can go and enter into its critical section. Whenever a context switch will happen and T naught gets the processor, it will execute its critical section and then it can set want 0 equals to false. So one thing only which you need to realize here, look at the value of turn. Once both the processes have said that we want to enter into the critical section, one of these statements will be executed at the end. So turn will be either 0 or 1. Right, and what will be turn? Whichever is the process which executes later. That will be the value of turn. If it is T naught which finishes first, then at the end turn is going to be 0. If it is T1 which finishes first, then turn is going to be 1. So turn is going to be exactly one of these things, 0 or 1. And based on that, exactly one process will go in the critical section. Exactly one. So first of all, both of them cannot go because turn will take exactly one value, either 0 or 1. And also one of them will go because turn is having some value, either 0 or 1. Right? So we have mutual exclusion here, we have progress here. Now comes the third condition, for which again we need to do some thinking. So the third condition is bounded wait. So both of these conditions, progress and bounded wait, they seem like similar, but they are different on a deeper level. So progress actually means that if critical section is empty, no one is executing in their critical section, and I want to execute in the critical section, I am allowed to do so. Bounded wait means that if, let us say, T1 has sort of expressed its interest. So T1 says that yes, I want to go in my critical section, but somehow it doesn't get a chance after that. So T naught executes in its critical section. T1 is still saying I want to execute, but even then T1 again goes in its critical section. T1 is still waiting and T naught keeps going, keeps going, keeps going. That is bounded wait. T1 is waiting for an infinite time to get into its critical section. So looking at this code, this cannot happen in this code. Why? Because let us say T1 announced here, it said that yes, I want to go in my critical section, but then anyhow if T naught didn't want to go, it could go. But let us say it was unable to go because T naught also wanted to enter and somehow the value of turn ended up to be 0. Turn ended up to be 0. T naught entered into its critical section, and let us say before T1 could actually execute and go in the critical section, T naught comes back and it again says I again want to go in the critical section. Now who will go, T naught or T1? Now T1 will get a chance here. Why? Because T1 has already executed this turn equals to 0. Right, and it is going to be T naught who is later going to execute turn equals to 1. So turn is finally going to be 1. So see here, T1 has set turn equals to 0. It cannot go into its critical section. It will actually keep waiting. Till when it will keep waiting? till T naught actually makes turn equals to 1. So as soon as T naught makes turn equals to 1, it can actually execute. I know it's slightly involved, so take some time after the class, think about it, and you will understand it. And any questions here, any confusion? So the idea here is both of these processes, the entire concept of this algorithm is both of these processes, they are alternating their turns. So once T naught goes, once T1 goes, then T naught goes, then T1 goes, similar to the first approach we discussed. But there is one more thing implemented here, that if it is T1's turn, but let us say T1 does not want to go, then it allows T naught also to go and execute in its critical section. So this approach, it satisfies all the constraints of synchronization. So you can have these kind of entry sections and exit sections in your code to ensure that no two threads, they manipulate the shared data at the same time. Now, there are some things here. So first of all, as of now, we have done it only for two threads, T naught and T1. What if I want one more thread, T2 here? Or let's say there are 10 threads. Still, you can use the same logic. You can extend this logic for 10 threads, but this code is going to become a whole lot complicated if you want to implement this for n threads. There is one more problem with this. So these kind of solutions, they are called software-based solutions to synchronization. Basically, you are writing your own code, some more code in your code so that synchronization is achieved. So these kind of codes, they were given by the people 60 years back from now. 60 years back, people used to work on single processor systems, and also the architectures of computers were simple back then. So today architectures have changed a whole lot. So these solutions might not work today. To give you an intuition of why they might not work today is, so if you look at these basic load and store instructions, everything ultimately boils down to load, store, add instructions in our assembly language. So what modern day system does is, let's say they are seeing two load and store instructions, and they actually realize that if I sort of swap these load and store instructions, my process will become more efficient. They might do in order to achieve some kind of memory efficiency. So they sometimes system to achieve some kind of optimization can swap these two instructions on a thread level. If that happens, our solutions will not remain valid. Second problem, in multiprocessor systems, it won't work because if you remember the concept of cache coherence, what happens in that case? So let's say T naught is executing on one processor, T1 is executing on one processor. So whatever changes T naught is doing in want 0, it might not be making it to memory. It might be making these changes in its own cache. So in case there was a single processor system, both the threads will execute the value from the same cache, will access the value from the same cache. Here, processor 0 has a different cache, processor 1 has a different cache, and want 0 can have two values on these two different caches. So that can mess up this whole algorithm. So we mostly do not use such kind of solutions today, but these solutions, they are discussed in every book to sort of provide you some kind of algorithmic thinking into how we can create these synchronization primitives. Okay, now coming to another problem here is, yes, which one of you pointed out yesterday. So this while loop is actually a big problem here. So one process is looping in this while loop, waiting for the other process to finish its critical section. And we discussed during that time that process which is executing the while loop is not doing any useful work. It is just wasting CPU cycles. It's just a check which it consistently performs as soon as a context switch happens and it gets the CPU. So this particular problem, it is called busy waiting. So you are busy, but while you are busy, you are just waiting. So it's just like if someone is inside a room, you are just consistently knocking and wasting your energy. So for a process, it is just like that. We are going to look at the solution for busy waiting in a little while. So let's first talk about how do we solve this problem here. So now I'm going to present a rather very simple solution to you, and this solution is called the concept of a lock, which we use in everyday life. So why to make all these complicated algorithms? What I'll do is somehow I'll implement this mechanism that any process who wants to enter into the critical section locks it, right? And when it locks it, every other process can see that the access to that shared variable is locked, we cannot execute in our critical sections. And when one process is done with this critical section, it will free up the lock. And we can also see that this will provide mutual exclusion, right? No two processes can be in the critical section at the same time because of this lock. If you lock a room, right, no one else can enter there. So definitely it's a mutual exclusion there. Also there is progress here. Why? Because as soon as somebody sees that lock is open, the door is open, they can go it and lock it from inside. So it provides us both the solutions, and it's also very easy to implement it for multiple threads. So let's try to see how we can implement that. Let me try to write a software based solution for this first. So what I'll do is I'll have this shared variable which is called lock, which is a Boolean variable, and initially I'm going to set it to false. Basically the lock is open, anyone can go and execute in their critical section. What I'm going to do before the critical section, in the entry section, what I'm going to do, I'm going to busy wait on this lock. So while the value of this lock is true, I am busy waiting. As soon as there is some other process who frees up this lock, this value will become false. At that time, I will acquire the lock. I'll make this lock to be true. I'll execute, I'll do the work which I have to do, and I'll set back this lock to false. Right? And the other process, it is also doing the same thing. So let's first talk in terms of two processes. So process 1, process 2, both of them are executing this code. Do you see a problem with this? This one I expect an answer to. It's actually pretty straightforward. Do you see a problem with this kind of implementation? So a shared variable lock, multiple people sitting. So whoever goes inside, first of all you check the lock. If it is open, you go inside, you lock it. After coming back, you open the lock. Okay, any other problem, a more fundamental problem. So one problem is it can always happen, right? So the critical section for a particular process, it can be very long. So in that case, no other option, others have to wait. Apart from that, do you think it will satisfy all those three conditions? Think in terms of mutual exclusion. Only one process should be in the critical section at the same time. Progress, if there is no one else executing in their critical section, I should be able to go. Bounded wait, no process should wait indefinitely to get into the critical section. So are all these three conditions satisfied here? Do you think mutual exclusion is satisfied here? Do you think only one process will execute in their critical section at a time? Try thinking in terms of context switches. What can happen when process 1 is executing this while loop? It's trying to check that condition. A context switch can happen at any time. You have no idea. So you might be executing an instruction, you might be in middle of it, there might be a context switch. So when I say instruction here, I see a C instruction. So if it's an assembly language instruction, you will finish it completely. So if you look at this while condition here, it's multiple assembly language instructions. So look at this here. Let's say T0 is executing. It checks while lock equals to true. It says, well, no, lock is false. I can go and execute in my critical section. And this first statement is executed, right? For this T0 process now, lock is false. So once T0 sort of gets past this line, gets past this while condition, it can execute in its critical section. But assume that before it could actually set the value of lock to true, it has not yet completed this instruction. It's still in the process of doing this, not done this, and a context switch happens. Lock equals to true is again multiple assembly language instructions. It will take you some time to actually put that lock in. And a context switch happens, and you come here to the process 1. So what will be the value of lock process 1 will see? It will still see the value false. Process 1 had not executed this particular line by the time you context switched. So process 1 here sees that lock is false. It also goes past its while line. And now once you are both the processes are done checking the while condition, they can execute in their critical sections. And this holds for even 100 threads if you have. So what is happening? Thread 1 checked this while condition. Thread 1 said, okay, well, lock is false, I can go. And as soon as it starts moving, thread 1 comes. A context which happens, thread 1 starts executing. It also realizes thread 1 has not set the value of lock to be true. It also feels, well, yes, lock is false, I can execute. As soon as it starts executing, thread 3, context which happens, you go to thread 3. So there is exactly no mutual exclusion in this particular solution. Any number of threads can execute here at any time. What is the solution for this? So solution for this is, if somehow I could merge both of these instructions as one. Merge means when both of these instructions are happening, this entire code is taking place. If I could sort of make ensure that there is no context switch, then my work will be done. Right? Then you can't context switch here. So when a process sees that lock is true, lock is false, it will come out of this while loop, it will set lock equals to true, only then you can context switch. But we also do not want to do that process of disabling and enabling interrupts. How do I ensure that no context switch happens? So one way was, whenever a process wants no context switch should happen, it can disable interrupts. Right? And then we could see that not every process is allowed to do that, and it can create a whole lot of problem for your system. If a process actually disable interrupts and go in a while loop, infinite while loop, entire system will crash. So processes are generally not allowed that, user level processes. So what we need here is actually a hardware solution. What I mean by a hardware solution is, there is a special assembly language instruction. I'm going to tell you what that is. That assembly language instruction, it will allow you to execute both of these things as one unit. So any assembly language instruction which you have, it is executed as one unit. We call it atomicity. It is executed atomically. So as I told you, whenever a load statement is executing, you cannot context switch in between a load statement. It will be executed completely, only then you will be context switch. What will happen? So there is a hardware primitive, there is an assembly language instruction which is provided to you, with the help of which you can achieve both of these functionalities in a single instruction. It will assure that you do both of these things at the same time. So that is called a read, write, modify instruction. So if you want to write it in C language, it will look something like this. So just have a look at it. It looks like this. It's called a test and set instruction. It can come in, it can have different names depending on which system you have. I'm going to write a code here. Use your understanding of C and tell me what exactly this code is doing. And this code is actually pretty straightforward. RV is random variable. Tell me what this code will do. So lock is a Boolean variable. I'm passing its address to the function. So call by reference. Anyone online? Can you tell me what this code will do? In plain English, what this is doing? It returns the initial value of lock and exactly. So what it is doing, it is returning you the old value of lock. So assume that the value of lock was false. What it will do? So the value inside lock is false as of now, right? So it stores this value. It will update the value of lock to true. So it holds this value inside this variable, which is RV. It makes the actual value of lock to be true. So if lock was not there, it applies lock now. but it returns you the old value of lock. So when lock was false, it will return false, but it will now apply the lock. In case lock was applied, what it will do? It will keep it as it is. It will let it be there, but it will return you true. Clear, everyone? Now, and the one thing about this instruction is it is going to be executed atomically. It is an assembly language instruction. It's the expression of that assembly language instruction in C language. So when you apply this function here, all these things, they are going to happen together. There won't be any context switch when you are executing any of these three statements here. Now can you tell me how can I use this test and set in this program here to make everything all right? So remember that whenever I call test and set on lock, what it is going to do, it's not depending on the value of lock, no matter whatever the value of lock, it is going to apply a lock, it is going to make the lock true, and what it is returning is the previous value of lock. So it's telling you whether the lock was applied before or not. So how do I use this test and set instruction which is here in this code? And this code will start working then. What I'm going to do is simply inside this while I'm going to put this instruction here, your test and set, and here I'm going to pass the address of lock. Right? While this thing happens, you keep waiting, otherwise you exit in the critical section and set lock equals to false. See what will happen now. For a particular process, let us say lock was applied, lock was not applied before. If lock was false, what will this instruction do? It's going to return you a false, and it's also setting the value of lock to be true. So anyhow, this instruction is always applying lock. Whenever you execute this instruction, lock will be applied, but what will be the result of this instruction? It tells you whether the lock was applied before or not. So if lock was false, it will return you a false and it will apply lock. If it returns you a false, it means you'll come out of this while loop and you can execute in your critical section. Right? So in that case, if lock was previously false, this process can now execute in its critical section. If lock was applied before, lock remains, lock is still applied, but this while loop, it's going to return a true to you. So you are still going to keep busy waiting here. This process, it cannot execute further. Right? And what is this thing which is making us to apply this solution effectively is this entire thing, it happens atomically. Whenever you are applying this function, this entire thing will happen at once here. Okay. Every process is doing the same thing. So again, the same questions. Is there a mutual exclusion here? Well, yes, we discussed, right? Based on the value of lock, only one process can enter into the critical section when lock is false. Right? And then there is progress here. If there is no one inside the critical section, lock is going to be false. So any process who wants to execute can set it to true and execute. Third thing, is there a bounded wait here or not? Do you think any process can starve here? So you have multiple threads, and all these multiple threads which are running on your system, they are using this test and set for the shared variable. Do you think that it can so happen that a thread keeps waiting and all the threads, they keep executing in their critical sections one by one, and this poor thread, once sitting in isolation, it doesn't get into its critical section? So threads are going to have some priority. If you are going to use, let's say, a priority scheduling, let us say there are 100 threads, and all of these 100 threads, they are implementing the same mechanism. Now assume that 99 threads have quite a good priority, and there is one thread, its priority is very less. So there is a chance, right, that this particular thread which is having a less priority will starve. Why? Because it will get CPU only once in a while, and once it gets CPU once in a while, maybe some other process is executing in its critical section at that time. So this process, it actually satisfies your two constraints, which is mutual exclusion and progress, but it cannot resolve bounded wait. So we can actually put some more code here and make it satisfy bounded wait also. So the idea is you can have some more code here which actually enables these threads to follow some kind of circular fashion. So whenever process 1 executes in its critical section, it should pass the ball to process or thread 1. If thread 1 doesn't want to execute, it should pass the ball or it should pass the lock to thread 2, so on and so forth. In that way, you can actually ensure that bounded wait is also satisfied. But again, that's going to make this code a whole lot complicated, just like Peterson's solution for multi-processors, for multiple threads or multiple processes. So what we'll discuss tomorrow is, we have just 5 minutes left. I'll stop here for questions. What we'll discuss tomorrow is one primitive which is provided on mostly all of your operating system today. You might have heard the name semaphores. Have any of you used semaphores in your coding till now? So semaphore is actually a primitive. It is provided by most of your programming languages like C and Python, and they allow you to apply this process of synchronization very easily. So we'll discuss about it tomorrow. So semaphores, they have certain operations just like this loc variable. Semaphore is similar to a loc variable. You can do certain operations on that loc variable with the help of predefined functions in your threading libraries, like your pthread library in C. C has a library, I think, which is called semaphore.h, with which you can apply semaphores. Python also, in your threading package, there are ways to apply semaphores. So we'll discuss about semaphores in tomorrow's lecture. Can you pass a sheet for attendance? If there are any doubts, you can discuss with me. Yes, Mihika, go ahead.
Ma'am, I had a question about the assignment.
Yes, tell me.
Ma'am, for the outputs, there were 4 outputs that we were supposed to give, right? The last being throughput.
Uh-huh.
Ma'am, I'm not able to find on the internet what throughput is, because it's giving me a very different answer from what I think you were looking for. What exactly are we supposed to calculate there?
So throughput, you have to compute on your CPU in like one time unit how many processes are executing, how many processes are finished per time unit.
Oh, okay, ma'am, got it.
Okay.
Ma'am, this
Send
is within our program or on like our CPU? Like, is this like a machine?
within the test case which is given to you. So you can assume that those are the only processes you are running on those CPU. So based on your Gantt chart which you are preparing for a particular test case, how many processes are finished in one time unit?
Okay, ma'am, got it. Thank you.
Okay, Megha.
Ma'am,
Yes, go on.
so I approached it with that thing in mind, like basically total time by number of like basically burst time units, and like
Mhm.
I realized that that number will always be one, right? Like burst time units by total time will always be one,
So see,
at least on a single core.
okay,
So therefore, I did burst time units divided by what do you call, like total like time
So
that the
see,
process have been queued for.
throughput is slightly different from CPU utilization. CPU utilization might be one in all your test cases. So CPU utilization is, are you using the CPU for all this time? And in your case, it is going to be one for all the test cases. Throughput is, let us say your Gantt chart finishes till 30 milliseconds, and in these 30 milliseconds, you have completed 4 processes. So what I'm just asking you, in 1 millisecond, how many processes are you completing?
Oh, okay. So the way I calculated it, or like the way I approached it, is because each process might have a different length.
Hmm.
So I put burst time units divided by like the amount of time each process is there for, like the like total burst time divided by total like execution time or like response time. That
That
way I
might
was
be
able to like
fine both in
that
all.
way I was able to get different results for them depending on like how fast or efficient each process was.
Okay. Is it clear now?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Any other queries?